Okay, so we were reading Kaspar, Prince of Cats, and a young bellboy, the person who's telling the story, Johnny Trott, has just met Prince Kaspar in the hotel, and he's just given him a little stroke, so let's see what happens next. As I stood up from stroking Kaspar, I noticed she was fixing me with a searching look. That's the Countess, the person who owns Kaspar. I wonder, are you a good boy, Johnny Trott? Can I trust you? I think so, Countess, I replied. This is not good enough. I have to know for sure. Yes, I told her. Then I have a very important job for you. During each day I am here in London, you will look after Prince Kaspar for me. Tomorrow morning I begin rehearsal at the opera, Covent Garden, Magic Flute, Mozart. I am Queen of the Night. You know this opera? I shook my head. One day you will hear it. Maybe one day I shall sing it for you on the piano when I practice. Every morning after breakfast I must practice. Prince Kaspar, he is very happy when I sing. At home in Moscow he likes to lie on my piano and listen to me and waves his tail just like now. Look at him. This is how I know he is happy. But when I'm at rehearsal, I must know that you look after him well, that he is happy. You will do this for me, feed him for me, talk to him, take him for a walk outside, once in the morning, once in the evening. He likes this very much. You will not forget. The Countess Kandinsky was not an easy person to say no to, and anyway, the truth is I was flattered to be asked. I did wonder how I would be able to manage it between my other duties downstairs, but I wondered also maybe whether she'd give me a good tip for it, although I certainly didn't say anything about that. The Countess smiled at me and held out her gloved hand for me to take. I hesitated. I'd never shaken hands with a guest before. Bellboys just didn't shake hands with guests. But I knew that she meant me to, so I did. Her hand was very small and the glove was very soft. You and me and Prince Kaspar, we shall be good friends. I know this. You may leave us now. So I turned to go. Johnny Trott, she said, laughing again. I am sorry, but you have a very funny name. Maybe the funniest name I've ever heard. I have decided that you are a good boy, Johnny Trott. And you know why I think this? You never ask for money. I shall pay you 5 shillings every week for 3 months. I am here 3 months for the opera. Ah, now you smile again, Johnny Trott. I like it when you smile. If you had a tail, you would be waving it like Prince Kaspar, I think. When I brought up her trunks later on and left them in the hallway of her suite, I heard her in the sitting room singing at the piano. I caught a glimpse of Kaspar lying there right in front of her, gazing at her, his tail swishing contentedly. When I left, I stayed outside of the door for a while, just listening. I knew even then as I stood in the corridor that this would be a day I would never forget. But I could never have imagined in my wildest dreams how the arrival of the Countess and the coming of Kaspar would change my life forever. There he is in the hallway, look, listening to her play the piano. And there is Kaspar sitting on the piano. Meow meow. Meow meow. Oh, meow meow, Kaspar. What happened next? Oh, look, some pictures. Interesting. I never had a father, nor a mother, nor any brothers or sisters. None that I know of, anyway. Not that I've ever felt sorry for myself. The truth is that you don't miss what you've never had. But you do wonder. As a small boy growing up in an orphanage in Islington, I often used to try to imagine who my mother was, what she looked like, how she dressed, how she spoke. For some reason, I never bothered much about my father. I must have been about 9 years old and on the way home from school one day, walking down from Tollington Road, when I saw a fine lady passing by in a carriage. The carriage happened to stop right by me. She was dressed all in black and I could see that she had been crying. I don't know why, but I smiled at her and she smiled back. At that moment, I was sure she was my mother. Then the carriage moved on and she was gone. For months afterwards I dreamed about her, but as the memory of that moment faded, so did the dream. I had other imaginary mothers, of course. They didn't have to be posh or rich, but I certainly didn't want to believe that my mother might be down on her hands and knees scrubbing someone's doorstep, her nose and hands red raw with the cold. Above all, my mother had to be beautiful. She couldn't be too old and she couldn't be too young. She mustn't have children. It was essential to me that I was the only child. And of course she would have to have fair hair, because I had fair hair. It was natural then, I suppose, that within a few days I had quite made up my mind that Countess Kandinsky fitted the bill perfectly. She was fair-haired, supremely beautiful and elegant, and about the right age to be my mother, and, so far as I could tell, childless. So, if she was my mother, it followed that I had to be a Russian count or a prince. I didn't mind which. The more I thought about it, the more I liked the idea, and the more I daydream about it. I would lie awake in my little attic room up in the servants' corridor, where the roof leaked and the water pipes gurgled and groaned, and I would dream my dream, knowing, of course, that it was probably all nonsense, and believing in it just enough for me to be able to enjoy it just the same. Thinking back, I'm sure it was this silly fantasy as much as my cat-minding duties that made me look forward so much to going to the Countess's rooms while she was at rehearsals. I went up there at every possible opportunity as often as I could manage, without my absence in the lobby being noticed. I was always up and down in the lift carrying luggage, and each time I'd slip away for a minute or two and check on Kaspar. Mr. Freddy noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "What have you been up to, lad?" he asked me once when I came back down. "Nothing," I told him with a shrug. "Well, one day," he said, "maybe that nothing will get you into a whole lot of trouble with Skullface, so you'd better watch your step." I knew Mr. Freddy wouldn't snitch on me. He wasn't like that. Usually I'd find Kaspar sitting at the bedroom window, watching the barges streaming by on the river, or sometimes he'd be curled up asleep in his chair in the sitting room. There's a picture. I'm looking out the window at the boats. Meow meow. Hey, Kaspar. Or he'd be curled up asleep in his chair in the sitting room. Either way, he'd hardly deign to give me a second glance until the food was in his bowl, and until he decided he was ready for it. Those first few days, I felt he was treating me in much the same way as most of the guests who came to the Savoy, with a certain cold disdain. I wanted to like him, and to be liked by him, but he kept his distance. I wanted to stroke him again, but I didn't dare, because he made it perfectly clear by the way he looked at me that he didn't want me to. I did dare to talk to him, though, probably because he couldn't answer me back. I would crouch beside him as he lay in his chair cleaning himself after his meal, and I'd tell him that my name was not Johnny Trot at all, but Count Nicholas Kandinsky. The Tsar of Russia was called Nicholas. I knew that, so I thought the name would do just fine for me. I told Kaspar that I was in fact the long-lost son of the Countess, and that she had come to London to look for me, and therefore I was to be treated with greater respect, even if he was a prince, and that anyway there wasn't much difference between a prince and a count. He'd listen for a while to my fantastical ramblings, but he'd soon tire of them, break into a great roaring purr, close his eyes and go to sleep. But then, after only a few days, he surprised me by jumping up to sit on my lap after he'd finished his meal. I dared to hope at last that he was treating me as an equal, and that he believed my story after all, and that now we might be friends. So I stroked him. Clearly I presumed too much. Kaspar sank his claws into my knee just to remind me who the prince was, and then sprang off my lap and went to the window, where he sat deliberately ignoring me, swishing his tail with quiet satisfaction and watching the barges on the river. I went to stand by him to try and make it up to him. "And I love you too," I told him. I said it sarcastically, but even as I was saying it, I knew that I really did mean it. He was an ungrateful, supercilious creature, and not at all endearing in any way, yet, despite all this, I loved him, and I wanted him to love me too. There were moments when, if I'm honest, I relished Kaspar's aristocratic aloofness. Twice a day during my work breaks, I'd take him out for his walk. We went to the park down by the river, but to get to the park I had to walk Kaspar on his lead from the lift all the way across the lobby to the front door. I swear that Kaspar knew perfectly well that everyone was looking at him and admiring him. He certainly knew how to put on the style, stepping out all high and mighty like the prince of cats that he was, his tail waving majestically. Did I feel proud? Mr. Freddy would doff his top hat to us as we passed by. There was some mockery in the gesture, I knew, but there was something else too. Mr. Freddy knew class when he saw it, and Prince Kaspar was class. He left no one in any doubt about that. Even the dogs in the park knew it. One withering look from Kaspar, and any notions that they might have had the prospect of a good cat chase withered away instantly. Tails between their legs, they would bark at us, but only from a safe distance. Kaspar made it plain that he simply despised them. And then he ignored them. There they are, having a good old walk in the park. Meow. Okay, we'll leave that there for now. Prince Kaspar.